Good evening on a November night that feels like November, an evening well suited to the light and warmth of good words. I'm Lex Runsman from the Linfield English Department, here to welcome you to another in this year's series of readings at the Neck. Chris Anderson has written and published in a variety of genres on themes rhetorical, ecological, spiritual, literary, ethical, and comic. Okay, maybe not so much the comic. He holds an MA and PhD in literature from the University of Washington, an MA in theology from Mount Angel Seminary, and he has taught in the English department at Oregon State since before the dawn of the current century.
Glad to be here tonight. I'm glad to be able to read with Stephanie, my colleague and my friend from Airlie Press. And I understand that some of you have actually been reading my book, which I appreciate very much, very, very much. I want to begin by reading two poems from my book having to do with walking in the woods. First is called "The Rosary Confuses My Dogs." When, walking in the woods, I pull out my long black rosary, the beads loop down and jingle a little like the leash when I pull it out to put the dogs back on. And the dogs, when they hear it, come running up, heads cocked, tongues lolling. No, I say, it's okay. And they bound away again. This is the poem I chose to begin my book. It's called Password. We're trying to get into Sue's computer, but we can't because she's dead. We don't know the password. Just last week I was sitting across from her at the Thai restaurant, and I could have asked her and she would have told me. How little would have been required to cross that threshold? Just a breath, a movement of the tongue, a sound. Walking in the forest today, down the road, I found a long, smooth tail feather from a hawk, gray and black and dirty white. I brought it home with me. I like how hard and stiff the quill is, like bone, and yet how light, too, how hollow. Holding it, you think of flight, though you also think of Dante and Shakespeare and Keats, dipping it in ink and starting to write. So you see in this poem, there's a leap right in the middle of it, a leap, a turn. I'm talking about the death of my friend, and then I start talking about this feather. Robert Bly famously called these poems leaping poems, where you just juxtapose, you move around, and my book kind of alternates between more straightforward narrative and this more kind of free associative sort of poem. I like how the narratives explain these more leapy poems, and I like how the leapy poems unexplain the narratives. There's an ancient prayer technique called Lectio Divina, or divine reading. And it involves a kind of leaping to what you do in Lectio Divina is you approach a passage from Scripture, read it aloud very slowly, just a short passage, and you let whatever word or phrase that jumps out move you and invoke whatever feeling or memory it's going to invoke. You just go from idea to idea or feeling to feeling to feeling. It's not interpreting the passage. It's seeing what it leads to. It's very nonlinear in certain ways, and it's autobiographical. The idea is that this passage of Scripture is about your life right now. This is one of the longer poems in the book. It's called Seven More Parables of the Kingdom. And what I'm doing in this is Lectio Divina. I'm trying to dramatize Lectio Divina. I was going to call this book Lectio Divina, but Lex talked me out of it. I don't know why that would be. Some of you might recognize that I'm playing off of the 13th chapter of Matthew, which contains 7 parables of the kingdom. So these are 7 more. The kingdom of heaven is like the room in your dream, and outside is a lake so blue and cold, you know something big is about to happen. Then you wake up and have your coffee and don't think about the dream again. The kingdom of heaven is like writing fast and not leaving anything out, and the same idea that always forms starts to form again. You know it's just an idea. You know you're just floating on the surface of reason. But underneath the sentences, you feel something big pushing up from the dark. The kingdom of heaven is like when you're walking on the docks and your best friend from high school sees you 100 yards away and even after all these years knows it's you. You have the same walk, he says. You lean the same way. All this time, this man was alive, and you were too. And you didn't think about each other for decades. And now he takes you in his boat to the other side of the lake, and his wife is making Jell-O, and the cabin is full of pots and pans and dog-eared books he has read and reread, just like you. All those cabins in the trees, all those roads winding out to highways and cities you have never been to, with offices and neighborhoods and parks where kids are throwing footballs. The kingdom of heaven is like the spine, which you also never think of. Most of the time, you don't even know you have one, until one day the doctor explains how discs darken as you get further down what for all the world looks like a lobster tail, segmented, curving left. And though the evidence is blurry and gray like those fuzzy photographs of UFOs that always turn out to be dishes, suddenly you know without a doubt, this one is true. This is what you carry. This slippery fulcrum, this meaty device. Walking up the little valley, morning, heavy dew, suddenly a field of spiders, a field of webs, every thistle strung like a racket. The kingdom of heaven is like the ecology of your yard. All these animals are scurrying around and building nests and entering into all these conflicts and alliances, just like in a Walt Disney movie or a book by E.B. White. And you never see them usually. Maybe a squirrel now and then, a bird. But you never give them a moment's thought, never think about them at all. Until one morning you walk out the door to get the paper and nearly step on a headless mouse, eviscerated, heart and lungs spilling from the breast. Another gift from the cats, another sign of their prowess. Those shiny viscera on the welcome mat, those intricate systems inside out, that dark red heart like a coat of arms. And sometimes what I try to do is I try to describe as clearly as I can, as best I can, an experience I've had, to honor that experience, just to try to be clear. So my brother lives in Spokane. Stephanie and I did a reading in Spokane recently, and he'd never been to a poetry reading, and he'd never read a poetry book. He's my younger brother, and he said, "Some of your poems don't make sense." And I said, "That's true. Some of them don't make sense. They're not trying to make sense. They're trying to kind of create a mood." But sometimes in a poem I do try to make sense, and that's really hard. It's really hard to try to be clear. This is one of those experiences I was given in my ministry. It was a gift given to me, and as soon as I had this experience, I thought, I need to write about this or try to write about this. And I asked permission from the person involved, and she gave me permission to write about it. So this is just something that happened to me. Piper's dad. An old man is dying in a dark, fetid room. His daughter is with him in her kindness, praying and holding his hand, though he was a harsh and bitter man all his life, and abused her and abused his wife. He had been in combat in a war, and maybe that was it. But now he is dying in a dark, fetid room, and he is rigid in his narrow little bed, shaking, hands clenched, and his daughter is with him. When I come to read the Psalms to him, he seems to recognize the rhythm of the words and how one line is parallel to the next, and this seems to soothe him for a while. He doesn't shake as much. His eyes stop darting back and forth beneath the stony lids. And later, after I leave, he opens his eyes. He seems to focus for a moment. He seems to look through the darkness at his daughter. And he says 2 words to her in a faint, croaking voice. You bitch. Who knows what this man was thinking or what he was seeing? Maybe he wasn't talking to his daughter. Maybe he was talking to death. But this is what he says. You bitch. And this is what his daughter does. She rises from that chair and she leans over that bed and she whispers in her father's ear, Daddy, I love you. And that night, he dies. Love is a great emptying out in losing. Love is a rising from a chair. It is a leaning over a bed. It is a whisper in a room and a word in a room. The last thing this man ever said was ugly and vulgar and mean. But this wasn't the last thing he ever heard.